3 years, a chance encounter, and an identical son. The Eyes of the Storm. Subscribe now. Hit the like button and share your first reaction in the comments. 3 years ago, he walked away without a word. Rich, ruthless, and utterly self-possessed. 3 years later, in the chaotic, sun-drenched terminal of Miami International Airport, Florida, his gaze locked onto a small boy. The eyes were a startling, icy blue, clear as the deep Atlantic, staring right back at him. And the most gut-wrenching realization of all, they were a precise, miniature replica of his own. This isn't just a story about a missed connection. It's about the catastrophic price of control and the moment fate demands payment. Can a man built on cold logic survive the heat of a forgotten love? The King of Control, Alexander Vance. Alexander Xander Vance had everything a man could possibly want in modern American life. Wealth, unchecked influence, a laser-sharp intellect, and a charisma that could disarm Wall Street. At just 32, he was the fiercely private CEO of Nexus Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech empires in the United States. Business magazines dubbed him a prodigy, investors hailed him as a visionary, and the tabloids declared him Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. But those who knew him intimately, the select few who got close enough, used other descriptors: cold, impenetrable, and distant. For Xander, love was a liability, a dangerous distraction. Emotions were categorized as debt on the balance sheet of life. He'd climbed to the summit by relying solely on pure logic, ruthless strategy, and absolute control. He had zero intention of ever changing that winning formula. 2. A Night in Brooklyn. The Eruption of Honesty. Lila Hayes was nothing like the women who typically cycled in and out of Xander's meticulously compartmentalized life. She was grounded, earnest, a third-year architecture student working 3 part-time jobs and hailing from a quiet, Midwestern town in Ohio. They met by chance at a high-profile gallery opening in Brooklyn. She was only there covering a friend's catering shift. Somehow, Xander singled her out from a sea of perfectly styled, glamorous attendees. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. In fact, she didn't seem impressed by him. That mystery intrigued him beyond measure. Their fling was never meant to last, not in his rigid mind. He didn't believe in permanence. But Lila's calm presence, her easy laughter, the probing questions she asked that forced him to truly think, and her brutal honesty started to dismantle his fortress brick by brick. She challenged him in a way no one else had dared. Over several months, their meetings grew more frequent and longer. Dinners stretched into weekends. Weekends bled into extended stays at his glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. Though he never admitted it out loud, a part of him began to feel something he couldn't name. Solace, security, a strange, powerful sense of finally being known. 3. The abandonment, the high cost of cowardice. Then came the day that shattered that fragile illusion. It was a cold, torrential downpour over Manhattan. Lila arrived at his penthouse, soaked to the bone, her eyes swollen and red. Her hands were shaking as she held a crumpled sheet of paper, the printout of a blood test. She didn't have to say a word. He knew. His silence was deafening. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, barely audible over the drumming rain. Xander froze. He blinked repeatedly, as if trying to reboot his mind. The moment stretched agonizingly. "How?" was all he managed, not in angry manner, but in cold disbelief. "I didn't plan this, Xander. I'm just as scared as you are." He stood up, walked to the window wall, and stared out at the gray skyline. For endless seconds, neither spoke. The rain hammered the glass like a countdown clock. "I can't do this," he said, his voice low and icy. "I told you from the start. I don't do family. You don't have to be involved, Lila said quickly, fighting to hold herself together. I'm not asking you for a thing. I thought you deserved to know. That was your mistake, he retorted harshly. Then, after a long, crushing silence, he added, You should leave. She stared at him, her eyes filling with painful disbelief. But he didn't turn around. He didn't look at her even once as she grabbed her coat and walked out, tears mixing with the rain on her face. The next morning, when she woke up in her small student apartment, there was no text, no apology, just a silent bank transfer to her account, a substantial sum, cold and utterly impersonal. No memo, no note, no name. Lila stared at the numbers on the screen, a knot tightening in her stomach. It wasn't help. It was money meant to silence her, the final word from a man who had already moved on. She closed her laptop and placed a hand protectively over her belly. There was no one else now. It would be her and the baby. That's all. And in a glass-walled office high above the city, Xander Vance returned to his spreadsheets, deleting her from his mind like a corrupted file. 4. A new start in the Northwest. 2 weeks after that night, Lila left New York. She told no one where she was going, not even her closest friends. There was nothing left in that city for her, no tether she wanted to maintain. The once thrilling skyline now only made her feel small, like a forgotten shadow. She packed her few belongings in silence. The pain had morphed into something quieter, deeper. It lived in her bones. She found a tiny, run-down apartment in a peaceful coastal town in Oregon, far from the East Coast buzz. It was nothing like her old life. The walls were thin, the heating barely worked, and the water sometimes cut out mid-shower. But the rent was low, and the neighborhood felt safe. The only two things that mattered now. She enrolled in night classes to continue her architecture degree online, and took on 2 part-time jobs. One as a barista at a local coffee shop, and another stocking shelves during the graveyard shift at a pharmacy. Sleep became a luxury. She moved through her days with a mechanical determination, fueled by the life growing inside her. The pregnancy was tough. There were days the loneliness was suffocating. An invisible, heavy hand pressed onto her chest. But she never doubted her choice. Never. When she first saw the baby on the ultrasound, she felt not fear, but pure awe. That small flicker, that whisper of a heartbeat, was real. It was her child, her reason to keep going. Pause for thought. If you were Lila, would you have accepted Xander's money? Would you have tried to contact him later, even if just to update him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. V. The birth of Caleb and the inescapable truth. She gave birth on a cold night in early March. There was no one to hold her hand, no one waiting in the hall. She bit her lip through the contractions, breathing through the pain as the nurses moved around her with professional calm. When the baby finally arrived, screaming, red-faced, and beautiful, she held him to her chest and cried harder than she had in years. Not from sadness, but from an overwhelming torrent of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fierce, unconditional love. She named him Caleb. The name had come to her weeks before, while walking home under a sky full of stars. Caleb Hayes. A new life, a clean slate. Caleb had thick, dark hair from the moment he was born. But what stole her breath were his eyes. A brilliant, impossible blue. So blue it was almost painful to look at them. Eyes that weren't hers. Eyes she had tried so hard to forget. The first time he looked at her with those eyes, she felt a crack deep inside, a blend of wonder and heartache. He hadn't asked to be born with those eyes, and she hadn't asked for a daily reminder of the man who gave them to him. But there was the truth, written into his very DNA. Lila quickly learned to live with less. Thrift store baby clothes. Free clinics instead of private doctors. She studied while he napped in her lap and sat for exams on 3 hours of sleep. Every dollar counted. Every hour was scheduled. Sometimes she would watch Caleb sleep and wonder how something so perfect had sprung from something so broken. He grew fast, with a wild curiosity and a smile that could melt her hardest days. He was the light that dragged her out of bed every single morning, and yet, there were moments she caught herself staring at him for an extra second. Moments when she saw not just her son, but the reflection of another person. A man she had once loved, or thought she loved. A man who hadn't even seen his son's face. 6. The Miami encounter. The shock of reality. Miami International Airport, Florida. 3 years later, the airport was crowded, humming with the controlled chaos of a Monday morning. Xander Vance moved through the crowds like a ghost in a tailored suit, focused and disconnected, as if none of it could touch him. He'd flown more miles in the last year than he cared to count. His flight to London was delayed by 40 minutes. He hated delays. He hated anything that disrupted the strict structure of his days. He stopped in line at a high-end coffee shop, eyes glued to his phone. The low murmur of conversations blended into background noise. But then, something pierced it. A laugh. Not loud or screeching, but bright, unmistakably childlike. For a reason he couldn't explain, he lifted his eyes from his phone. At a small table near the window sat a boy, perhaps 3 years old, with a juice box in front of him. He was giggling at something simple, maybe the way the straw bubbled. His hair was dark and unruly, falling slightly over his forehead. But what froze Xander, what stole his breath completely, were the boy's eyes. They were blue. Not just blue. They were his blue. That particular, penetrating, icy shade that had always set him apart. He stood staring, unable to move, as the boy looked toward the window and the morning light fully captured the color. It was like looking into a mirror, shrunken by time. He didn't hear the barista call the next order. His phone went dark in his hand, forgotten. He kept watching. And then, she appeared. A woman approached the child with a napkin, gently wiping a drop of juice from his chin. She leaned down and whispered something, and the boy laughed again. She was in profile, but even after all this time, after everything, he recognized her. His heart began to pound, but not in the way he liked. It wasn't anticipation. It was panic, guilt, disbelief. She looked different. Her hair was longer, darker. She wore simple jeans and a knitted sweater. There was something in her posture, tired yet solid, that told him she had become someone entirely new. And yet, it was still her. The girl he had once held, the girl he had abandoned. He couldn't move. His feet were nailed to the floor. The boy was his. Of course he was. And if the child had those eyes, his eyes, there was only one explanation. He had a son. Lila turned then. She must have felt his gaze. Her eyes found his. For a moment, neither of them reacted. Her expression didn't change. She just looked at him, her face unreadable, but her fingers tightened slightly on the boy's shoulder. Xander finally took a step forward, slowly, like approaching the edge of a cliff. "Lila," he said, his voice dry and lower than intended. It didn't feel real to speak her name out loud after so long. She straightened up. "What are you doing here?" Her tone was quiet but sharp, like a door slightly ajar with the security chain on. He looked at the boy, then back at her. "I was getting coffee. My flight is delayed." She narrowed her eyes. "Right." He hesitated. "Is he yours?" She looked at the child, who was now happily playing with a small toy truck. "He's mine," she said, her voice soft but firm. Xander swallowed hard. He has my eyes. She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she met his gaze again and said, "Yes," and he cries with mine. The words hit him harder than a slap. He opened his mouth and closed it, scrambling for something to say. "I didn't know," he managed to articulate. "You didn't want to know." Her voice cracked slightly, the only betrayal of her emotion. "And now you do. So what?" He looked at her, truly looked. She was stronger than he remembered. She had been forged by something he couldn't begin to understand. He paused, lost. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "Well," she said, picking up her bag. "Now you have." Xander watched as she took the boy's hand, his son's hand, and turned to walk away. The boy never even looked back. But Xander stood there, rooted, his heart hollowed out by the weight of the truth. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at numbers or contracts. He was looking at everything he had walked away from. And it had his eyes. Call to action. If you think Xander deserves a chance at redemption, hit that like button and comment. What would you do in his situation? 7. The unyielding pursuit and the last chance. Xander didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark corner of his hotel room, the city lights blinking. The airport encounter replayed in his mind with nightmarish clarity. The boy's face, those impossible eyes, and Lila, so strong in her stillness, shouldering a burden he had never bothered to share. He heard her words, "He has your eyes, and he cries with mine." The next morning, he canceled his flight to London. For the first time in years, business felt distant, irrelevant. He spent the next few days trying to find her. She had vanished again. It was as if she had completely erased herself. It was pure luck, fate, perhaps, that he saw her again. Days after the airport, he went to a small, independent bookstore, desperate for distraction. He was near the children's section when he heard a familiar, small laugh. He turned slowly. Lila was a few feet away, crouched down by a shelf, helping Caleb reach a picture book. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a worn hoodie, but she looked beautiful in a way that tightened his throat. Caleb was waving a book about dinosaurs in the air, and she was laughing softly. It was a scene so domestic, so whole. And none of it included him. "We have to talk," Xander said quietly, breaking the fragile peace between them. They sat at a small, annexed coffee bar. Caleb stayed inside with a kind bookseller, happily occupied with a muffin and crayons. "I'm not here to take anything," Xander began. I didn't know." "You knew enough to leave," she countered without looking at him. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I didn't grow up with a family that made me believe I could be anything other than what I am. My father was—" He stopped, shaking his head. "He was cruel, and I thought the best thing I could do was leave before I ruined you. Before I ruined him." Lila finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "And yet, leaving didn't save us from ruin. I went through everything alone. Doctor's visits, labor, sleepless nights, everything. Alone." Xander nodded. "I know, and I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't expect it. But I want to meet him. Be a part of his life, in any way you'll allow." "Do you know what he asked me last week?" Lila said. "He saw another boy with his dad in the park and asked me why he didn't have one. Do you know how many times I've had to lie, change the subject, or tell him that I was enough? I don't want to hurt him," he said. "I just want to know him." Finally, Lila spoke. "He doesn't know who you are. To him, you're just a stranger. If I let you get close and then you disappear again, you'll shatter him. So, if you're serious, this isn't something you can walk into lightly." Xander looked at her and nodded. "I won't leave again. You can see him," she said softly. but only as a friend. At first, and only if you mean it. He nodded again, almost afraid to breathe. And for the first time he saw not only guilt and regret, but a flicker of a future. Quote, building a bridge. Love in small gestures. In the following weeks, Xander stepped into a world he had never imagined. A world of storybooks, sticky fingers, and mismatched socks. A place where time was measured not in deadlines or market trends, but in juice spills, giggles, and a curious little boy's 1,000 questions. Lila allowed him to visit Caleb at the park, always in public, always supervised. She never introduced him as Caleb's father. At first, she simply said, "This is my friend, Xander." And Xander, who once negotiated billion-dollar deals without batting an eye, felt a lump in his throat every time he heard it. He learned to approach gently, with a patience he didn't know he possessed. Caleb was shy at first, more interested in building sandcastles than talking to the man just outside his bubble. But Xander showed up every single time. Rain or shine, on time, no excuses. And slowly, something shifted. Caleb started handing him plastic shovels. He began asking Xander to read books aloud. One day, without thinking, he reached out and grabbed Xander's hand to cross the street. Xander held it as if it were made of glass. Lila watched it all with cautious, vigilant eyes. Trust, for her, wasn't something that could be rebuilt with grand gestures. It had to be earned with consistency. Xander, in his quiet way, tried to show he had changed. He wrote her a letter, not an email, but a handwritten note on heavy paper. He told her about his own father, how he had been a source of fear instead of love, and how he had thought leaving would protect them. He confessed that the success he had built meant nothing compared to what he had lost, and that seeing Caleb had destroyed that illusion in seconds. She never mentioned the letter out loud, but something about her demeanor shifted. She began inviting him to more outings. The ice was finally starting to thaw. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench, Caleb climbed onto Xander's lap without a word. It wasn't planned or prompted. It just happened, as natural as breathing. Xander froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around the small boy and held him tighter than he thought he dared. Likes. The fragility of hope and the promise. One evening, while folding laundry in the kitchen, with Caleb asleep in the next room, Lila addressed Xander. "I read your letter," she finally said. "Every word was true," he replied. "I know," she said. She looked at him, truly looked, as if seeing him not as the man she once loved or the one she hated, but as the man he was becoming. "You've changed." "I'm trying. I don't expect anything from you, Lila. I don't want to rewrite the past. I just want to be a part of his future. We'll have to take it one step at a time." He felt a loosening in his chest. When he left that night, she didn't immediately shut the door. She stood there for a moment, watching him walk down the hall. And though the space between them was still wide, it no longer felt impossible. Something had begun. The first step towards healing. And now what? This is the time to comment. Do you think Lila should trust Xander completely? What ending would you like to see for this family? X. Epilogue. To the moon and back. The meaningful conclusion. Caleb's 4th birthday arrived with the golden light of early spring. For the first time, Lila wasn't the only one planning it. Xander showed up with arms full of supplies, balloons, and an enthusiastically wrapped present. Later, after the guests had left, the three of them sat on the floor together, surrounded by wrapping paper and half-eaten cupcakes. Caleb curled up between them, exhausted, one small hand clutching Xander's. "I never had a day like this," Xander said quietly. "Not as a child, not as an adult. Just this. Joy. Family. I didn't know what it felt like until today." "You helped make this day special," Lila said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "He's happy because you were a part of it." Xander hesitated, then said, "There's something I've wanted to ask. I know I have no right to expect anything, but I'm here, and I want to keep being here, not just for Caleb, but for you, too. I love you, and I want a life with you, not just visits and park days. I want real mornings with burnt toast and laughter and everything else. I want to stand beside you." Lila didn't answer right away. She looked at the sleeping Caleb, then at Xander. She reached into a drawer and pulled out something small, a silver astronaut keychain, the one Xander had given her months ago. "He still asks about the moon sometimes," she said. She handed him the keychain. "I believe you, Xander. Not because you said the right words, but because you showed up, again and again, even when I pushed you away. You earned this moment." She leaned in slowly and kissed him. Not with desperation, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited a long time to feel safe again. It was a kiss that tasted of forgiveness, of beginnings, of rediscovered trust. When she pulled back, she looked into his eyes and said, "Let's go to the moon and back, together." In that moment, Xander realized he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. Not power, not money, not control, but this, a hand in his, a child sleeping between them, a woman by his side who had every reason to leave and instead chose to believe. A family. And it all began with a pair of eyes he saw once in an airport, eyes that were identical to his own, but belonged to someone much better than he had ever been. His son. Someone who taught him what real love looks like, not with words, but with presence. From that day on, he never walked away again. Final call to action. Don't forget that Xander and Lila's journey is a powerful reminder that redemption is possible. Share this video if you believe in second chances. Hit like and activate notifications for the next chapter. Tuet voi. Toi rut vui vibantit kochuin. A look to the horizon. The journey continues, the gaze that changed everything. Subscribe now to follow Xander and Lila's next steps. What challenges do you think they'll face? Let us know. 11. 1 year later. The routine of redemption. Time doesn't fly when life is full of small miracles. It settles. A year had passed since Caleb's 4th birthday. A year since the kiss that sealed a profound promise. Spring had once again painted the valleys of Oregon green, and Xander Vance's life had morphed into something his 4 years ago self would never have recognized. He was no longer Manhattan's golden bachelor. He was a man who woke up at 7 a.m. to make pancakes, mostly unburnt now, and helped hunt for dinosaur-themed socks before preschool drop-off. Xander had made a radical decision. He retained his position as CEO of Nexus Dynamics, but he restructured the company to allow him to work remotely 3 weeks a month, only traveling to New York for 1 week. He sold the cold, sterile penthouse in the city. He invested in a brighter, larger house on the Oregon coast, closer to where Lila and Caleb lived. It was a home with a garden, plenty of space for Caleb to run, and a view of the rugged Pacific coastline. Xander's change wasn't cosmetic, it was structural. Video calls with investors were often interrupted by Caleb's shouts during hide and seek. Billion-dollar contracts were signed at a kitchen table still littered with traces of Play-Doh. He discovered that being a present father and a reliable partner required more strategy and emotional control than any of his old business ventures. Lila was still cautious, but the tension had melted from her shoulders. Xander's company wasn't a threat. It was a support. She leaned on him not out of necessity, but by choice. Xander would sit with her late into the night, helping her review architecture case studies, offering a logical perspective and a warm cup of tea. Their relationship was being built from the ground up, not on the broken foundations of the past, but on the routine of trust, mutual respect, and the shared, joyful raising of their son. 12. The business test. Clear priorities. One chilly November afternoon, a situation put Xander's new stability to the test. He received an urgent call. It was Jeremy, his right-hand man in New York. "Xander, the merger with Frontier Tech has completely collapsed. They pulled the offer. You need to get here. This is catastrophic. We need your presence here, now." In the old Xander, this crisis would have triggered panic mode. He would have booked the first private jet. But the new Xander, sitting on the living room floor, helping Caleb build a block tower, sighed and looked at his son's concentrated face. "Jeremy, calm down. Can it be managed remotely?" "No. It's a face-to-face board meeting in 48 hours. It's the biggest deal of the year." "What do I do?" Xander stood up. He saw Lila, who had heard the conversation, looking at him from the kitchen. Her eyes were a silent question. "Will you leave?" "Tell the board I'll be there, but not in 48 hours. In 3 days," Xander replied, his voice firm. "And tell them if the deal falls apart without my immediate presence, it's because their urgency outweighs their confidence in me." He hung up. Silence settled, broken only by the sound of wooden blocks tumbling down. "You should go, Xander," Lila said, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's your job. It's your legacy." "My legacy is no longer in that boardroom, Lila. It's here," he said, pointing at Caleb, and then at her. "They need my mind, but Caleb needs my presence, and I promised you I wouldn't choose wrong again." Instead of leaving immediately, Xander spent the next 48 hours working with Lila to prepare for the trip. He explained to Caleb that he had to go help solve a very big puzzle, but that he would return with a surprise. Before departing, he embraced both of them with silent strength. When he arrived in New York, 2 days after the collapse, the board was furious. Xander was unperturbed. Instead of apologizing, he launched directly into the presentation, solving the problem with a clarity and calm that left everyone speechless. He closed the deal, not out of panic or greed, but with a cold logic that was now underpinned by the patience he had learned at home. Back in Oregon, the day he returned, Caleb ran toward him at the airport, shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" Lila, standing nearby, watching, smiled. "You made it back in time for bath time," she said. Xander hugged her, then hugged his son. The private jet, the penthouse, and the boardroom did not carry the same weight as that single moment. Call to action. Do you think the old Xander would have risked the deal of the year for his family? Tell us what you think of his change in the comments. Fertia, the future, a silent promise. As the months passed, the relationship between Xander and Lila deepened. There was forgiveness in the way she looked at him, and hope in the way he planned their future. One summer afternoon, while Caleb was at a friend's house, Xander took Lila for a walk on the beach. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. It was the same sea she had once looked at, with such deep loneliness years ago. They sat on the sand. Xander pulled a small olive wood box from his pocket. "I don't know if you'll ever fully forgive me, Lila," he said, his voice low and sincere. "There's a part of our history that will always be painful, a part of Caleb's life that I missed because of my cowardice. And I'm not trying to erase that with this." He opened the box. Inside, there wasn't an ostentatious diamond, but a simple silver band, engraved with the words, "To the moon and back." "When I gave you that rocket keychain, I felt like I was handing you a promise that I would return. But this time, it's not a promise to return. It's a promise to stay," he said. "I'm not asking you to be my wife so we can be a family. We already are. I'm asking you because you are my home, my anchor, and the woman who taught me that true strength lies in vulnerability. Do you want our journey to continue?" Tears filled Lila's eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of the release from a burden she had carried for years. She didn't say the word yes. Instead, she reached out her hand to him. "We already share the same name on the mailboxes, Xander," she said, with a brilliant smile. "We have Caleb. We don't need a contract. We need the journey." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a symbol of a new kind of wealth, the richness of shared moments, of promises kept, and of love that had survived the test of absence and redemption. The real legacy, a father for Caleb, Xander's true achievement, the one not measured in stock shares but in the heart, was the unbreakable connection he built with Caleb. Caleb no longer asked why he didn't have a dad. Now, Xander was a constant, the strong voice reading dragon stories, the one teaching him to tie his shoelaces, and the one who never laughed at his wildest ideas. One evening, while looking at the stars from his bedroom window, Caleb nestled against Xander's chest. "Dad," he said, his voice sleepy. "Yes, buddy? Are you the strongest man in the world?" Xander smiled. "No, Caleb. I'm strong at some things. But your mom, she's the strongest. She can do anything. And you," Caleb whispered, "what are you best at?" Xander stroked his son's hair, his gaze drifting to the doorway, where Lila stood silently, smiling. "Me, Caleb. I'm best at staying. I'm best at not leaving." That night, when Xander lay down next to Lila, she cuddled against him. "You were right about your legacy," she whispered. "It's not the buildings. It's not the money. It's him. And it's this." Xander held her close. He had gone from a man of success to a man of value. The wealth he now possessed was immeasurable. The sound of laughter in his garden, the weight of a silver ring on Lila's finger, and the unconditional love in his son's blue eyes. A mogul's mistake had become a family's miracle, proving that the true measure of a man is not how high he can climb, but how deep he is willing to fall back down to correct his path. The open ending, a family looking to the horizon. The journey to the moon and back didn't end with a silver ring. It ended in the everyday. Half a year after that walk on the beach, life in their Oregon home had achieved a steady rhythm, one forged by patience and relentless love. Xander's suitcases were no longer hastily unpacked. They stayed in the closet. His trips to New York were shorter and less frequent, always planned around Caleb's school plays. Lila had returned to her studies with renewed vigor. With Xander's support, she enrolled in a master's program in architectural design, preparing for a career that would allow her to pursue her vocation without the brutality of the long, unpredictable hours a single mother couldn't afford. Xander's vision wasn't just applied to business. He now used it to build his family's future. On a warm summer afternoon, the couple, still unwed by law, but sealed by the silver ring and consistency, sat on their porch watching Caleb, now nearly 5, try to catch crickets in the garden with tireless energy. "We've made it to a good place, haven't we?" Xander whispered, slinging an arm over Lila's shoulders. "Yes, we have. But what now, my love?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Xander smiled. He knew his entrepreneurial nature, the very thing that had built an empire, wouldn't allow him to simply stop. Now, the big questions arrive. Staring at the horizon, what will become of us? The week before, Caleb had asked Lila a question that had left them both pondering. "Why don't I have siblings?" It was a simple question, phrased with the innocence of a child who only saw love around him. "Caleb is growing up," Lila said, playing with the silver ring. "And he knows. He knows there's a blank space in our history, a space where you weren't there. And even though it's filled with love, that space exists." "I know, and we'll face it. Together," Xander said, squeezing her hand. But Caleb's question, it got me thinking. Do we want more? Are we ready to grow this family? Lila laughed, a low, genuine laugh that the old Xander would never have elicited. "We survived chaos, absence, and guilt. Surviving a newborn seems manageable. And there's one more thing," Xander added, his gaze fixed on the ocean horizon. I spoke with Jeremy. Nexus Dynamics is ready for serious international expansion. This would involve more travel. Or a move. A move where? Lila asked. Her voice calm but alert. The proposal is to open the European headquarters in Vancouver, Canada, next year. It's a huge leap. New opportunities. New beginnings. And a different kind of coast. Lila fell silent, absorbing the magnitude of the idea. Leaving Oregon, the land that gave her refuge and where she built her new life, would be an immense challenge. But life alongside Xander, now, meant always looking forward. Xander looked at her, not pressuring her, letting the weight of the decision settle. We won't make a decision until we're sure, but I want you to know that wherever you go, I go. There's no distance that will separate me from my family anymore. Caleb, having failed to catch any more crickets, ran up to them and plopped down onto Xander's lap. Dad, will you read me a rocket story? Xander smiled, hugging his son, his gaze meeting Lila's. The real story never stopped. It just changed the setting. Redemption was achieved, the family was united, but the adventure was just beginning. Vancouver, a sibling. The next chapter of their careers. It was all there on the horizon, awaiting their decision. And what do you, the audience, think they should do? Should this brave family face a new beginning in Vancouver? Or should they stay in the security of Oregon? And do you think Caleb will soon have the sibling he desires? The future of Xander, Lila, and Caleb is up in the air. Let us know your opinion in the comments. Final call to action. If you loved this continuation and want me to tell you the next chapter of their life in Vancouver, hit like and activate notifications. Share this story of love and redemption. Until the next adventure. Tu yet voi. Toi rut vui vibanda teljoi va utit kochuin. The Vancouver chapter. Crossing the new horizon. A new dawn in British Columbia. Welcome back to Xander and Lila's journey. Hit the like button and tell us, what are your predictions for their life in Vancouver? New baby? New challenges? Toast. The decision and the leap. 6 months after that quiet evening on the porch in Oregon, Xander and Lila made their choice. They decided to embrace the challenge and the change. Vancouver, British Columbia, with its rugged mountains, dense rainforests, and rapidly growing tech industry, was their new horizon. The move was the first time Xander and Lila truly navigated a massive logistical challenge as a united front. Xander, the man who once outsourced all his personal administration, found himself debating the merits of movers and negotiating the timeline for Caleb's new preschool enrollment. Lila handled the emotional core of the transition, gently preparing Caleb, now 5, for the biggest change of his young life. We're going to a place with actual snow, buddy, Xander told him one evening, showing him pictures of Whistler Blackcomb, and lots of big boats in the harbor. Caleb, with his father's bright blue eyes and his mother's steady spirit, took the news in stride. Can we build a giant sandcastle there, Dad? The biggest one you've ever seen, Xander promised, pulling him close. The family settled into a spacious, modern house in the Kitsilano neighborhood of Vancouver. The house had a stunning view of English Bay and the North Shore Mountains, a constant reminder of the majestic scale of their new commitment. It felt different from the cozy, familiar chaos of their Oregon home, but Xander and Lila were determined to make it their own. Lila dived into her master's program at the University of British Columbia, balancing her studies with Caleb's schedule. Xander took on the mantle of Nexus Dynamics' new global vision, making Vancouver the strategic hub for all international operations. The move wasn't just geographical. It symbolized Xander's complete shift in priorities. He designed his new office to be right near the house, ensuring his commute was a 10-minute walk, keeping him permanently anchored to his family. 6 events. The stress test. Career versus home. The first 6 months in Vancouver were a whirlwind of excitement and intense pressure. Xander was driving the most ambitious phase of his company's history, securing deals across Asia and Europe. Lila was neck-deep in architectural blueprints, sleepless nights fueled by strong Canadian coffee. One Friday evening, a crisis hit. A key server farm in London went down. A high-stakes, all-hands-on-deck emergency. Xander was glued to video conferencing from his home office, the pressure palpable. Meanwhile, Lila, exhausted, had an architecture critique the next morning that could make or break her semester. She had planned to spend the evening finalizing her presentation, but Caleb developed a sudden fever. She walked into Xander's office, Caleb clinging weakly to her leg. "He's running a 102 fever, Xander. I need to get him settled, but I still have hours of work left." Xander, mid-sentence with his London team, held up a finger, signaling 1 minute. Lila watched him, her heart sinking a little. This was it. The old tension. The moment when the CEO took over and the father disappeared. He muted the call. He didn't look at the screen. He looked only at his son, then at Lila, whose face was etched with fatigue. "London is on fire," he said simply, "but Caleb is right here." He gently lifted Caleb into his arms. "Hey, buddy, let's get you some juice and a movie in my bed, okay?" "But the servers?" Lila asked. "Sure, I'm surprised. Jeremy and the VP of Operations are competent. They will handle the immediate fire," Xander said, the cold, logical tone now directed at the problem, not his family. "My priority is managing the resources I have right here." He settled Caleb in their master bedroom, turning off the lights and whispering stories until the little boy drifted off to sleep. He then returned to Lila, who was staring at her blueprints. "I'll take the next 3 hours. Go finalize your presentation," he ordered, not as a boss, but as a partner. "I'll keep an eye on him and handle the London emergency on low volume." Lila didn't argue. She leaned in, kissed him with deep gratitude, and returned to her desk. For Xander, the decision was no longer a struggle between work and family. It was a matter of efficient priority management. His company could survive a server failure. His son could not endure a neglectful father. He had learned the ultimate formula. Family is the non-negotiable asset. Pause for thought. Do you think Xander's choice here shows a permanent change, or is he just managing the guilt? What would you prioritize in this situation? Let me know your honest thoughts. 7 then. The empty chair and the wish. As the Vancouver winter settled in, bringing chilly air and views of snow-capped mountains, a quiet longing began to grow in their home. Caleb, now comfortable and secure, often spoke about their friends in Oregon, and, more specifically, about the children who had siblings. He would line up his toy dinosaurs and assign them roles. This is the daddy T-Rex, this is the mommy Triceratops, and this is the little baby. But he always left one space empty. One evening, while Xander was reading to him, Caleb pointed at the empty space in the bed beside him. "Daddy, who should sit there?" Xander smiled. "Your stuffed bear, maybe?" Caleb shook his head, his blue eyes serious. "No. I think maybe my little brother or sister." The comment hung in the air. Xander looked up at Lila, who was leaning in the doorway. She was still radiant, but her eyes held a similar soft yearning. Xander and Lila had talked about expanding their family before the move, but the chaos of relocation and the high demands of their new lives had put the conversation on hold. Now, standing on the edge of this new chapter, they knew they couldn't postpone it any longer. A few weeks later, on a slow, rainy Saturday, Xander was packing away boxes in the garage when he stumbled upon a small, dusty box labeled NYC MISC. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the original rocket keychain, the one Lila had given back to him that night in Oregon, but it had broken years ago. Beside it, he found the laminated printout of the first ultrasound Lila had tried to show him years ago in New York. The small, blurry image of Caleb at 8 weeks. He carried the box upstairs to Lila. "I found this," he said, handing her the ultrasound. "I never really looked at it back then. I didn't let myself." Lila took the paper, her eyes softening as she looked at the image of their beginning. It was hard to look at for a long time. It was a symbol of all the loneliness. Xander sat beside her and gently took her hand. "The past is done, Lila, but the future is wide open. Are you ready? Are we ready for another trip to the moon?" Lila looked at him, at the simple silver band on her finger, and then at the closed door of Caleb's room. "I don't need a map or a spreadsheet for this, Xander," she whispered. "Yes, let's grow this family. Together. And let's make sure this one has a father who is there from the very first minute." Xander's heart swelled with a powerful emotion that transcended logic. He knew the anxiety and pressure would return, but this time, he was not afraid. He was anchored. He was ready. The new journey and the fear of repetition. The news that they were expecting again filled their home with a mixture of immense joy and quiet anxiety. For Lila, the fear was that the past would repeat itself, the loneliness, the burden of carrying life alone. But this time, Xander was her shadow. He attended every doctor's appointment, holding her hand, asking the right questions, and keeping a meticulous, organized schedule of her prenatal care. For Xander, the fear was much deeper. The terror of the inherited pattern. He worried that the coldness of his own father, the panic that had made him flee New York, would somehow surface again. He was constantly checking himself, analyzing his reactions, determined not to let the old self take over. One morning, Xander caught himself being short-tempered with Caleb over a spilled glass of milk. He saw the flash of the cold authority he had sworn to bury. He immediately stopped. He knelt down, looked Caleb in the eye, and apologized sincerely. "I'm sorry, buddy. That wasn't fair. Daddy is tired, but that's no excuse to be impatient." Lila, witnessing the exchange, knew this was Xander's real redemption. Not the money, not the presents, but the conscious effort to break the cycle. As the months passed, the only real contention was the baby's name. Xander wanted something classic, powerful. Lila wanted something simple, grounding. They finally compromised, finding a name that bridged their two worlds. The final trimester arrived with the beauty of a Vancouver summer. They were sitting on their deck, looking out at the glittering water. "Do you know what the most important thing I learned from all this is, Xander?" Lila asked, placing his hand on her swollen belly. "That I'm terrible at pancakes?" he joked softly. "No. That the opposite of success isn't failure, it's absence," she said. "You were successful, but you were absent. Now, you are present. That's the real win." Call to action. The new baby is almost here. What name do you think Xander and Lila chose? And do you think it will be a boy or a girl? Comment with your prediction. 19. The second chance. The ultimate conclusion. The new baby arrived in the quiet pre-dawn hours of a September morning. This time, Xander was there, not just in the waiting room, but right next to Lila, his face a mixture of terror and overwhelming love. When the tiny, perfect infant let out its first strong cry, Xander cut the cord. He held his second child, his face wet with tears that he didn't try to hide. "It's a girl," he choked out, handing her gently to Lila. Lila held her daughter, whose tiny hands reached out to grasp her finger. And her eyes, they were the same icy, deep blue as Caleb's, the signature of the Vance lineage. They named her Ilara Vance, a new star in their sky. Xander sat there, watching his wife and daughter. He wasn't counting profits. He wasn't checking his phone. He was simply present. He realized that his life before Caleb and Ilara was merely a calculation. His life now was a masterpiece. He looked at Lila, then at Alara, and finally toward the door, where a sleepy Caleb was being ushered in by a nurse. Caleb walked right up to the bed, looked at his new sister, and touched her tiny hand. He then looked at Xander, his blue eyes shining. "She has your eyes, Daddy," Caleb whispered. "But she's going to cry with both of us, right?" Xander pulled both of his children close, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, son, she is. And I'll be here for every single tear." He had made his first promise to Caleb that he would stay. His second promise, to Alara, was that he was already here. The mogul had finally found his true empire, not in the stock market, but in the circle of two small arms, held fast by the love of the woman who taught him to stop running. He had gone to the moon and back, and finally, he was home. Final call to action. What an incredible journey. If this story